In August 1969, to the dismay of their many fans, Frank Zappa disbanded the original Mothers of Invention. Feeling constrained by the musical capabilities of the various members of this large ensemble, he cleaned the slate and almost immediately set about assembling a new group. Hand-picking dynamic talents from across a variety of musical worlds, by 1970, the second incarnation of the Mothers of Invention was unleashed.
Zappa evangelized about his new band that he had, like a man who was completely liberated.
We have a new personnel for the Mothers of Invention. It consists of the two lead singers from the Turtles, Mark and Howie. A man named Jeff Simmons is our bass player and comic relief. Ainsley Dunbar on drums, and a black jazz pianist from San Francisco named George Duke. And Ian Underwood is on saxophone and keyboards.
It seemed musical. It seemed like everybody was a good musician and we were all enjoying playing together. It wasn't like any kind of a shift, really, of anything. It was just something else we were up to at the moment, or mischief.
The whole unit, everybody was ultra capable of playing. And I don't think it really matters whether you're blues, jazz, classical, whatever. Once you started playing, it all blended and merged and made whatever the potpourri was at the end of the music scene, it would just sort of flowed out.
We were more of a rock and roll band than Frank had ever played with. I think there was more of a tendency that we were all used to playing as groups. Frank let it become a band for that 2 years that we did it. It brought its own personality, it brought its own sound, and it brought its own kind of casualness and sense of humor to the music.
This film not only focuses on this second incarnation of the Mothers, but also looks at the very different work that bookended their brief existence, in which Zappa incorporated ideas from free jazz into his music to produce 3 typically eccentric solo albums. As the world moved into a new decade, the musical landscape was shifting, and across this prolific but often overlooked period in his career, Zappa remained a pioneer, a modern-day composer who confounded both audiences and critics, but who refused to compromise.
The guy was an immaculate orchestrator. Some of the things he came up with are just absolutely brilliant. For someone that didn't really study with somebody, I mean, that just kind of studied on his own to pick this up. I mean, I don't throw around the word genius very often, but I think if there is one, he's it.
When the Mothers of Invention's seminal debut album, Freak Out, was released in 1966, it both aggravated and excited listeners in equal measure. A surreal and scathing critique of American culture, both musically and lyrically, it was totally unlike anything previously issued by a major record label. And the band's leader and composer, Frank Zappa, quickly became one of the key figures of the emerging counterculture. Across their next 3 albums, and through their inimitable live performances, the Mothers of Invention continued to blaze a singular trail, with Zappa drawing together disparate musical forms while conducting the crazed antics of his band's ever-expanding lineup. By the end of the decade, they had become commercially and critically successful and had built a large and loyal international fan base. Yet ever the polymath, back in 1967, Zappa had also served as the conductor on an album of his own experimental compositions, Lumpy Gravy, had begun work on his film project Uncle Meat, and by the end of 1968 was developing his own record company with his manager Herb Cohen. Across the next 3 years, the bizarre and straight labels would not only see him signing a large roster of unconventional talents, but also producing or co-producing a number of their album releases. Despite the reputation and growing popularity of the Mothers of Invention, the breadth of Zappa's many ambitions were drawing him away from his large ensemble of musical misfits.
For Frank Zappa and the Mothers in 1968, and in 1968 was a big period of time for them. I mean, this was, in my opinion, their heyday still. At that point, he probably had no idea he was going to be breaking up the Mothers. I think, if anything, he thought they were going to be getting more successful. I know the band did. By this point, they'd been in Life magazine, which is the biggest magazine next to Time magazine in the United States at the time. So to be in Life magazine like that, a huge article with all those photos, those guys had arrived. There's no question about it.